Rather than doing a long video at the end, I decided to split where we were. I think 2 turns. I think 4 turns total plus a wrap would have been very long, and my processing time is improved by keeping them at under an hour each, even though they've been kind of hitting right around an hour, which is longer than I should do on my machine. Okay, so first thoughts on this last turn. I made the rolls. Both sides got 2 CPs to choose. The English won the initiative. They're going to use Orange's cav to come in. English choices were easy, Orange and weak, because they can pummel this fairly large formation that's struggling, but still somewhat of a threat. So it kind of runs a dual purpose there. It also gives them time for their other formations. Well, something like this just wants to more or less sit in place. But over here, we want to rest and reform if possible. We're probably not going to get that opportunity, but the later in the turn that we can go, the more likely that we can actually get some, reduce our fatigue levels and get away with things. For the French, Freslin was definitely the option. The next option was, do I take Duras with his chance of being able to carousel, which would help put pressure on some of this stuff. But the other side is I could just take the guaranteed artillery fire, which will help put pressure on Cardigan's side. And there's something very key at risk over here, which we'd rather not see Cardigan gain control of. I don't think we're going to gain control of it, but that's beside the point. There doesn't seem to be much key at risk here at all. I know there's a town over here somewhere, but I'm not going to reach that in any reasonable sense of the word. So I'm kind of hoping to out-casualty the Allied force at this point. That seems I have a slight edge there right now, and I don't think I'm going to be able to push forward. We'll see, but even though I want to. One thing that I see, though, the rally option, it used to be a very viable choice in the game, which is to say, I would take a pick with the thought of rallying a force using my limb so that the opponent, if he hit it, would be hitting my full strength force. That's no longer a real option anymore. If you take an action with a rally action, you end up not being terribly... You're not going to waste a limb on that in general, unless you got nothing better to do. In general, you're fine. You can rally your 2 units at the end of the turn or whatever by using the no limbs phase, and that's perfectly okay. But actually using it for a limb, so it's restricting your choices. The question is, how much more historical is it for the game to limit that? Because in terms of a gameplay motive, I think it was more fun being able to, rally your units and prepare them for the for the next strike. Whereas here, and especially since you could reform your line at the same time, and all kind of other stuff. Here, between a couple of things, it's becoming pretty much a non-option. Now you still have your movement options and all that go on, but this game actually provided you with some kind of interesting choices that most tactical war games don't give you in terms of gameplay manipulation, which was kind of neat. And I feel like now we're stepping back from that and going to something that feels more traditional, where you really don't have a lot of choices of what to do with your units once they're kind of engaged. Those choices might have been gamey, though. All right, let's get on with that cav charge. I did a mixed charge, and it was not at all effective. I'm wishing I had done a carousel. I got good checks on the French in the sense that they only got the half fire for the most part, but you can see the cav still took kind of a chewing up, and then when they hit, they're not getting the advantage of the moving charge. They're having the standing charge, so they ended up actually having less effect. It wasn't too bad on the straight fire, even with the cav being half. That was probably slightly to their advantage, actually, due to die rolls or whatever. Fatigue for Freslin. I didn't mark it, but he is up here. I'm just keeping that tentatively there because I know I'm going to take an action on him, which it's easier to remember to mark it then. But actually, maybe I'll put it halfway just to really confuse myself. But then when the actual melees happened, the British got the worst of it, and I think 2 of their disorders on the line actually came from their charge attack. Moving to Freslin's activation, and this is what may be one of the most key moments in the game. I know I've called that in some of the others, and we didn't see much happen, and we might not here either. But he's basically taking an assault and attacking 3 different British formations that have kind of closed him in. Interesting position. Remember, infantry is potent against cav when it's attacking, especially because it gets its full fire, etc. However, here we've got standing assaults that aren't going to get 2 rounds of fire. Some of the cav may withdraw as well. Here again, we're hitting the cav. We've already been hitting them. We're not in perfect shape with the French. Maybe we should face the enemy. Doing that costs the first round of fire, but these cav don't get a first round of fire anyway. Some of these others I should probably consider yeah, I don't see. Here's the problem. If I offer my flank, I'm going to get 2 rounds of fire in a front that I don't want. So I use these move fire charges to indicate that I only get half fire with those units. All right. Anyway, I'm going to be pulling back some cav probably, and also taking some firepower checks for the cav reactions here. See, the problem though is if I pull back some of these cav, the ones that I don't pull back get shot up all the more, so I gotta think real carefully about it. All right, that was quite painful. Just so many different die rolls. We went through all steps basically, including some preliminary fire, a lot of across the board fire. In a lot of cases, like cutting through the cav here, we would take out 1 cav in the preliminary fire, another unit behind it in the full fire, and then be in position. Well, I don't think I did a lot of shocking here, but we had shocks over here that broke through, actually took out a leader whom I'm going to have to replace at the end of the turn with one of those letter replacement leaders. I don't know if I really need to. I could just give Württemberg the rest of that cav because I can't figure out what the hell's going on down there. I don't know even how much of it exists after these destructions. We can see here we got a total of 5 Allied cav have disappeared. It was a big hit in terms of points at least 3 points each, right? 9, 13, 18. Oh shit! Cav costs double, and I haven't been, I think, recording it as double everywhere. I'm gonna have to recheck those points. But anyway, that's like 36 victory points there. I think sometimes I've been counting it double, but I'm not sure I always have because of this weird dual accounting. Anyway, that was pretty hefty. However, the French didn't get away cheap. They didn't lose any units, but you can see they've got a lot of routes coming out of that. They do not have much in the way of a formation left there after that attack. And that's the thing. The Allied formations are a little stronger after all that attacking, even though in some ways I thought actually the Allied formations would get more broken up by route throughs. It didn't work out that way, although they did take some hits. The French line is pretty much non-existent and is going to have to reform to do anything that's not very big. All right, I absolutely need a break, even though I'm not done with the limb. I did a quick recount, and strangely, I had the French right. The Allies, though, were actually 6 points off. I must have missed a couple of cav there for doubling for whatever reason. Weeks pushes back with virtually no effect on these kind of scattered units of Freslins. And the final activity chit was the artillery the French picked. Some very close range fire here did nothing, but some longer range fire routed one of Cardigan's units. It's pretty easy when somebody's that fatigued to beat them up. That +2 penalty, even with good British units, a good die roll bang, the bad route. Annoying factor in how these rules work, and of course I could house roll it to say, hey, I'm behind a defensive position, I don't have to do this or something like that. But there's a couple French units here. Here's what I'd like to have done. I'd like to take Lotham, I'd like to swing this part of the line and hit those. I can't. Because if I do an assault, I gotta come streaming across the river and hit the calf. That may not be so terrible, to tell you the truth, but I don't want to do it, you know, and I shouldn't be forced to. So I just did a rally action instead. That just kind of highlights something that it's very hard to come up with command and control rules that apply in a reasonable fashion that players can use. I would argue that this is where the CWB, NBS, the gamers stuff, and I believe actually this is the start of a system that went through multiple different incarnations. But from what I remember from that, that also kind of follows it, which is the, and the Tactical Combat Series as well, which is the, hey, write down what you intend for this unit to do. And then that's what it does, you know? And in this case, and then give a lot of tactical flexibility that would allow. Now, I understand in several conditions, though. I mean, if you look at a Civil War unit and compare it to, say, a musket and pike unit, I'm not as familiar, obviously, with this particular era. Not many people are. It was considerably easier to send a detachment out to accomplish some specific goal in the American Civil War, whereas it was much more likely to move a line forward in 30 Years' War, and I assume in this. So what you have is kind of, you'd need additional restrictions to build around it. But I think trying to assume that the axis of advance would always be in one direction is unreasonable. Sometimes it works out fine, for example, when the axis is in one direction, but in a situation like this where I want it to bust out in all directions and really try to throw the enemy off. But here, I absolutely do not want to do that. And honestly, if I started tinkering with this game, I would start thinking about, okay, you know, I can define an axis of advance and just make up some rules, especially since I play primarily solitaire, to make it make sense to me. But the real problem is that as a game, it doesn't have those rules. And what CWB and its ilk with the written orders kind of takes advantage of is that, hey, be sensible, you know, don't be an idiot type of concept behind it. And in a sense, you could kind of see, maybe I'd feel a little freer if the rules tried to stretch it a little bit more and gave kind of a, don't be an idiot about this, don't try to misuse these rules. And because I really do feel like I should be able to punch in one direction and not in all directions if I'm surrounded. In fact, I think that's particularly important if you're surrounded. If you are surrounded, you might want to drive and advance in one direction in particular to break the enemy in that line and try to escape. Not go running in every single direction if you're in a square. That doesn't make sense. Then we push into the final turn of the game. significant routes going on over on this French right flank and Allied left. Elsewhere, things seem to have come under control, either through units dissolving or not. French get themselves, what, 17 more points? And the English, 5, 10, 15, 27, 41. You can see it's beginning to look like a French victory, unless things change. Just the point difference here, that 40-point difference. I don't know. I don't think there's 40 points of terrain that's under control. This is worth 25. This is worth a lot too. So it's possible that if the English hold, they're probably going to hold this, but if they manage to get full possession of that, I think it's possible that they might eke out a win based on territorial, even if they take greater casualties. Really, this one is coming down to a time limit, and it I think invariably will. And that always gives kind of an artificial feel to the game, unless the armies are so worn out, like at the end of 3 days at Gettysburg or something. It was tough to figure out what the hell to choose for people. So this is one of the few places where some change could happen. So both sides selected Cardigan and Biron. But elsewhere, I've got Freslin selected for the French with the idea that might see some opportunity come up at that point. Worst comes to worst, I can do either a withdrawal or a rally earlier than I would otherwise, and maybe prevent, you know, something like this from being destroyed if it's a rally. Maybe. For the Allied forces, these two are definitely of interest. Like I said, Cardigan. The French picked the artillery, and they won the initiative, and they're going to fire that off first, because that is the only thing they have that they're sure kind of makes sense. The two armies are both fairly tired out. I think I also took Duras, but I'm not positive. It sounds like a lot of pieces I picked, and I don't think I had more than 3 picks. So maybe I'm mistaken about some of them. It was particularly troubling, though, to figure out what the hell to do with the Allies. Again, I don't want to, you know, make this attack this way, because then I got to charge across the river. Although, again, that's not necessarily a terrible thing, especially this late in the day. All right, let's get started. Apparently, I cheated. I put a Frez in. I put in 4 chits. The final one that came out was Frezin for the French, and I'm just going to ignore it and play it as if it wasn't in there. We did have an assault over here by Biron. This failed to move forward again, and that didn't really gain anything, didn't really do anything at all, just maintaining the status quo. And Cardigan's the final limb. A little bit of firing, some definite activity. We've got a couple of units destroyed, some routing going in both sides, but nothing that's going to change the feel of the game. I think the Allies have a victory here based on holding terrain, but I'm not absolutely certain. I don't know if they get points. If they get points for this, even though they don't occupy all of it, then I think they've got it. If they don't get points for that, I'm not so sure, but I have to look at how that's worded. But right now we're going into the no limbs phase. There is some chance that some things will happen. Not much. And then really, the big thing to do is all the mechanical process involving these routing units. Whether or not I have to roll for them, I feel like I have to at least roll for them in the route and reform phase if they're routing. I think I can ignore everything that's not routing during that phase, just to save points. You don't want to roll for things that aren't routing on the last phase of the game, because they aren't going to do you any good at all. In fact, I kind of screwed up and probably rolled for some stuff last turn that I shouldn't. There's a sign of some of the ridiculous stuff that can happen. I launched an attack here with Lotham. Most of the cav just pulled back. Some of it got hit, you can see. But also, of course, hitting this, there was only 1 unit left on the flank here, with 3 units. After the firing, The one unit left was pretty close to being gone. So I launch a shock attack from these two. Boom. Very, very easily destroys it. But then I roll a pair of 9s for the effect on them. They have to make a normal morale check. That routes both of them. They just have to run somewhere. You just kind of stand there and say, I got no idea how to explain what just happened. But to me, that's one of the things that maybe I'm not understanding very well. But I get the feeling that, wow, the game really doesn't seem to represent, as historically and detailed as you'd want when things like that happen. Well, after a few rally attempts, some successful, some not, and the nods over here. This is it. End of the battle. Now it's just time to count the points, throw these guys in, and also look at the territories. The Brits aren't going to get this. They didn't get this 1 hex. The official rules are kind of annoying because if I was playing by them, the French wouldn't be able to score these because they don't have a unit occupying them. I don't feel like leaving a garrison unit behind makes a lot of sense in a tactical battle like this. Some games maybe it does. So I'm just willing to say, if the enemy could get there and just land in it, if they can figure out a way to skirt around there and take it with some cav or whatever, then it's their points. But otherwise, you control it, man. Because the key here is controlling the battlefield rather than, some kind of population control or something like that. There's no reason you'd want to garrison that town except tactically. And in terms of that, well, these lines here are sufficient to cover whatever tactical value it has. It's a way of delimiting how much of the battlefield you took and nothing more than that. And I feel as long as it's obvious, I'm not going to have a problem with that. All right, we'll count the points and I'll come back with a quick score and maybe a few thoughts before I move on to something else. Yes, we'll be getting back to Malplaquet, but I need a break between these. These are like more painful, but I compare them to something like the larger games of brain's dying on me, the Musket and Pike series. I'm looking through and I'm not seeing the one I want to mention. Sweden Fight's on down there, which I had a lot of fun with. I really, really enjoyed that one more than any of the other Musket and Pikes that I've played yet. Except maybe This Accursed Civil War. I've only played one scenario of that, only opposed, and that was fun. And then there are others like Lily Banners that I definitely need to get to. But I like so far, the older they are, the more I like them. And I'm really kind of unimpressed with some of the newer ones. But with this, just because they're more of a headache, less clean battles. With this, I feel like it's just so much work for the level of abstraction that is obvious as in the game. And maybe a historical representations as well. I'm not convinced one way or the other by that. I've seen claims that these are pretty much entirely fictions. It would be nice if somebody, if we had a Ben Hull of the this era, Queen Anne's War, Spanish Succession, all that. However, same thing? I don't remember. We don't. So I'll be back with some scoring. Lots of video left, so I'll waste your time by actually scoring it out. I did the troops, and we end up at 151 to 112. Let's look at the key locations now. Sharkin 2823, and that's going to be this area. Definitely Allied. It's 25 points for either side. So I'm going to add that to the French casualty total. Diepenbeck 2323. That's definitely French. It's only worth 5 points for the French, so 156. Herlingen. I find this exciting. That's expected to be French, so even the fact that they don't garrison it doesn't even really matter because they get no points for it. Anya, that's over here. Nobody's getting the points because nobody has it. Hyun, that's over here. Well, I'm going to give those 5 points to the French. And now Biver, and that's not going to go to the Allies. 37, that's over here. It's not worth any points. Okay, well, it looks to me like the French won a minor victory, basically. And I'm a little surprised by that. I thought the 25 points that the Allies were going to give for this would be I didn't realize 25 or whatever. I also thought the Allies were going to get points for more things. So that's about what you've got here. Clearly just sitting there defensively can work, right? I mean, if we look at the point difference, the French pulled themselves, what, 10 points over the course of this. I'm not quite sure why I don't have a 10-point increase there. Maybe I added it to the wrong side. Doesn't look like it. Whereas the Allies, looks to me like they're sitting on really 25 points, and that's it. So as long as the defense, is capably handled, as long as the Allies don't manage to lose more points than the French do. And the French have a lot of soldiers, but they can't really bring them to bear terribly well. So that defensive terrain should have worked. The point advantage for simply holding this should be enough to win you the game as the Allies. I don't know if I got unlucky or what. Certainly, had I been able to push into this, I would have had a fairly... well, even that wouldn't be terribly substantial here. It's just another 25 points. We took a lot of casualties with the Allies. And one part of that is probably the problem of density. The defensive position, as you keep throwing more and more troops into it, becomes so dense that it's easy to rout. But I would say probably the biggest issue is choices to rally and when I made them and such not. That's always a factor in this game towards trying to break your army, is when you decide to make rolls. The fatigue system definitely caused more problems than it was worth. I'm not terribly convinced that it's at all adds any accuracy to the game. I think it adds some detail and some inaccuracy, actually. Certainly, if the original design was accurate, adding the fatigue has made it inaccurate. Maybe a more balanced version where there's -1 for the beginning and +1 up here would make more sense or something. But infantry seems pretty sturdy in certain circumstances. Anyway, let's send this one up.